You know, I think of you as I've always kind of seen you a little bit as like a kind of a John the Baptist slash town crier from the lineage of Leonard Cohen and the goodness of Canada and good people way back when.
Mm.
And of course, I don't want to ask you the same questions everybody's asking you about COVID and the end of the world and stuff you and I have been plowing in the fields, and you for many more years than me.
Who
Um,
needed COVID? I ask you.
Actually, it's the perfect storm. In my view, it wasn't. We have a hurricane heading this way, and that potentially could do a whole lot more damage than the COVID. So the COVID's been, in some ways, kind of benign in terms of getting us to friggin' stop.
Ah,
And of course, the combination of stopping the madness and people getting out of their addiction to busyness and what's next and progress and all that stuff we're familiar with, the idea of actually isolating and people actually maybe having to be by themselves for maybe months or at least days, and also the maybe new realization that we could die and the people we love could die any day now. Maybe the combination of all those three things are, I would say, quite useful and powerful and positive at this time in the game. Whether it's really going to make any difference, sometimes I don't think so. But even here, there's the rush to get back to normalcy, the insanity of normalcy. And we're actually in a beautiful bubble here where there's no COVID here. And if we were smart as governments, we'd keep it that way and ensure that we protected the people here in Hawaii. But instead, they're now moving towards making it easier and accessible to the madness that's on the mainland to come here. And while they're closing down everywhere on the mainland, they're trying to open it up here, the insanity of it all. So here we are in the midst of it, doing what we do. And fortunately,
mm.
I feel tremendously fortunate that in a world where so little makes sense, what I'm doing makes sense.
Well, you are lucky if that's true, and if it continues to make sense with the game-changing foolishness. I mean, one of the enduring images for this time for me will be people in their 60s and 70s having temper tantrums in Costco about being told to put a mask on. I
I
don't know, of all the things, I mean, there's much more egregious things going on, obviously, but there's something about that crystallizes the whole era, really. The whole notion that I should be able to do what I want as long as it's not against the law. And if it is against the law, then they should change the law because I still want to do what I want.
And that very thing, Stephen, lines up with the right wing crazy people with their guns, and that it lines completely up with those people who say don't infringe on my rights to, no government, etc.
Yeah.
That's where they come together, and it is super bizarre. It certainly manifests in our local, Amana Foods, natural food store. People up in arms about having to be told to wear a mask. It is actually, it is in some ways a total reflection of the bizarreness of the age we live in, and maybe it is those 60s and 70s people, but not just those people.
No,
It's
indeed.
madness.
Yeah, yeah, it's all that and more. And I was driving, you mentioned it a few minutes ago. I think outside Chicago years ago on some kind of tour, and I saw a road sign. And I've seen the same sign 1,000 times in different places. It never really got to me until that moment, and it said, "Be prepared to stop." You know, and I thought, this is oracular, just masquerading as a traffic sign. It's actually the way it is and the way it must be, but it's very unclear whether or not anybody's going to take in any instruction. Here we are now, where we've gone one step past be prepared to stop, and it's now be prepared to be stopped. And then it's just be stopped. Sounds like an old English parable or something, be stopped. And even that, Bodhi, I don't know what it takes, to be honest. I mean, I haven't been around forever, but these days it begins to feel like it a little bit, to be honest. And I, s- I, I've always been probably of a grimmer outlook than yours, rather. And my outlook is seems unconquerable now. I mean, I'm not that I'm taking any pleasure or pride in that, but there's the notion that there's anything that obliges the current regime to fundamentally doubt itself. I don't mean be insecure. I mean fundamentally be willing to not know everything and not have the answers and so on. That's just I don't see any sign of it, and it's hard to believe actually, because we have this deal now. We couldn't have asked for a better deal to get us to the point of decision making. That is, we were unnerved in February, March, April at the prospect of people dropping in the streets in their droves, in their thousands, and never happened. And that people would die in their sleep basically never happened. That we got everything we needed by way of an advance notice that we're not in charge and that we need to take instruction from the way things are. And as you said, the appetite, the mania for what's recognizable and usual, excuse the expression, trumps every other possibility going. And based on that, I quit.
I don't believe you. I don't believe you. I understand the feeling though, and I
Yeah,
told you a long time if it wasn't for my grandkids, let's party.
that's right. That's right. Although you dropped the F bomb in there too, which just put a nice tone on it.
I wanted to say it, but this is going to be on radio.
No problem.
Yeah, and what else was it gonna take to stop us? Because clearly we weren't no, there was no much energy going towards stopping the madness in any real way, on any on any level where it could possibly happen. Something had to happen, and maybe I hear all this talk about that the viruses have their own intelligence, and that that stuff, that the intelligence, that there is intelligence, hopefully. I may be more positive than you are, but optimism is getting harder and harder to hold on to.
That's true. It's true. It just doesn't pay to be optimistic, Bodhi. Well, I mean, fortunately, we won't be possessed of the same grim aspect all at once that I have.
Well, we have this hurricane heading towards us now, right? So
Yeah.
we have everything else going on. We have no economy. Tourists are starting to be come in now, and some people are so happy, and lots of people don't want to see tourists and are
Sure.
getting irritated at seeing them. And I turn my irritation towards the government and going, "What are you doing? What's going to happen? Oh, sure, there'll be tourists, but we're all going to get sick, and who's going to go to work? And we have this amazing opportunity to make Maui a COVID-free forever place." And what do on and on and on. And I wonder if we're all collectively in shock that all of a sudden one day everybody was wearing a mask. I mean, and I think in some ways people have never really come to terms with how quickly things changed, and the realization that that's how quickly things can change. One day everywhere you go, people having to wear masks. How bizarre! Who'd have thought that in January? Oh, that you're kidding? No way.
Yeah. Yeah. And then on the other side of that suddenness is the sense that I have that nothing fundamentally has changed. I know what you mean as far as the expectation of behavior, but your country and mine, they're considerably different in this regard from everything I've seen. I mean, I have to go by way of the news feed like most other people do, but we don't have anything like the challenges to the willingness to put that mask on and proceed that way. There's no principle really that I've heard or that I'm aware of, generally speaking, in the country that would challenge that in any way that anybody would take seriously. In other words, there's no principle that people could mount in this country to suggest that some kind of travesty to be obliged to wear that thing when you're in a confined place.
Well,
It's
clearly, every country in the world can see that America has gone absolutely insane,
it's
right?
true.
I found that out the first time I went to Europe. I was like, no wonder why Europeans think people in America are absolutely nuts. They are, and you see that, independence, do it your way, have it your way, be all
Yeah.
you can be. It's all about you. Well, where is that stronger than in America? And now, of course, it's white man's last stand, I hope. But it's coming out all the corners and the woodworks, and now you hear about black people still getting lynched to this day, and it's all out now, and maybe it was always there, it probably was, but now it's gotten to really, and anybody who thought, oh, it doesn't matter who you elect, maybe they've rethought that thought. Yeah, it's insane, absolutely insane. And thank God I'm not on the mainland where it's really insane. At least, again, we're still in a little bit of a bubble, and there's so many different races of people here that we're not on a white. There's not a lot of white nationalism going on around here. If anything, we're the black people in Hawaii.
I see what you mean. Yeah. How about scared? Does that register at all? Do people seem scared to you?
Well, I was thinking about a friend of mine my friend of mine who's in remission of cancer. When the COVID thing happened, she came to me and she said, look, I'm kind of a high risk person. I realized I didn't have all my paperwork in order. I want to get my whole life stuff in order, everything. Will you help me do that? And I said, sure. And she said, I'll bet all of your friends are going to be here any day now calling you up, who are in the same boat, who are in their 60s and 70s and 80s, and realizing that, hey, a death could happen. It's real. And nobody came. No, but none of my hundreds of, and I thought, well, that's fascinating. And so in some ways, like you said, the expectation is behavior is going to shift on a collective conscious scale, and I'm not seeing that. So is there fear? Well, there is, but it's the Hawaiian. There's so many other parts to what's happening in Hawaii. Most of us realize how good we have it. The coral is coming back. People are seeing more fish in the ocean. There's 18,000 rent-a-cars parked at the airport, and a whole lot of people are really happy about that. This is like the Hawaii I came to in the early 70s, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole lot of people that would just as soon it stays that way. But again, as tourists are flowing in, we're starting to hear about a confrontation, and maybe abusive or a violent outbreak. But the homelessness is very apparent, and given that the U.S. is going to stop their federal unemployment support at the end of this month, evictions could skyrocket here and everywhere in the country, and all these rich people that have second and third homes here aren't here. There's tons of empty homes here. The hotels are empty. Meanwhile, there's homeless people everywhere, and there'll be more probably. And so is there fear? If the hurricane hits us, everybody's going to have another giganto wake up. Because the COVID thing didn't do any real physical damage in terms of destroying homes and infrastructure, and that could easily happen this weekend. So people are stocking up, like you said, in Costco on toilet paper and rice. That seems to be the two big ones, and water, I guess. Funny, really, toilet paper.
Yeah, especially that. Well, when you consider the emphasis is placed upon toilet training in our early years, and that it's a kind of moral and ethical imperative to get that shit straight, excuse the expression, that you come around to the other end of life, as both of us have seen many times over, and who wipes who becomes the Rubicon that you have to cross, or you refuse to cross, and you call it undignified or worse. So stocking up sadly makes sense.
Isn't that kind of the line when they talk about death with dignity? I think that's the line. And the first time I was with a dying person who said he'd rather be dead than have somebody wipe their butt, I was shocked.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that stuff goes very deep, man. It's very early training,
Yeah.
the
So
autonomy thing and all of that.
when I think of you in terms of how deeply you've affected me and continue to affect me in such powerful and valuable and important ways, and for that I'm eternally grateful to you. The part that you brought me into something I'd never really thought of was the notion that in general, us white folks are homeless people without a people and without a real home,
Mm.
and why we're homeless and orphans, and why that makes us not even remotely indigenous, and why that may be exactly why we're killing everything indigenous and eating the planet to compensate for our homelessness and our a lack of true people and identity and indigenous. And it's taken me here I am at our land that you visited us a number of times and stayed with us a number of times, and now 23 years later, Stephen, and truly the understanding, or at least touching on what does indigenous feel like in
Mm.
terms of being connected to all these trees that we started as babies, and spending all these years digging in the dirt and being with the land and listening to the wildlife in this part of the world, and getting a sense of maybe just a sense of what indigenous actually is and feels when it's lived. And so then I think of how much you helped attune me to that, to that first through the homeless orphan, piece of it, and how big that is, and how the results of it continue to be acted out in these gigantic ways that, like you said, are enough to just throw our arms up in the air and say, "F bomb it," you know.
Yeah. If you don't stop moving, this is unavailable. That's all there is to it. And and people mistake it. A lot of kids are in touch with me these days about farming, ironically. And all of them, for them, the magic bullet is owning a farm. And I have to say pretty routinely, you're not old enough to own a farm. And they say, what? What's it got to do with? I thought it had to do with how much money I have. I said, well, I know you think so. This is a standard preoccupation, but no matter how much money you have at your age, you don't have the capacity to take care of a place yet. You haven't even learned how to really be taken care of yet. And you want to, turn the tables and imagine that you can lavish all of your capacity on this poor piece of ground that doesn't even see you coming. So the alternative is this marauding around the countryside, looking for a place to belong. This Bodhi, this word belong is one of the great treasure troves in the English language, this word. Now, you and I both know that the standard meaning of it now has something to do with you have a rightful claim to, or you have an indisputable um, right to occupy things of this kind. None of that meaning is in the origin of the word in Old English. In Old English, the be in front is an intensifier. That's its function. So, bewitch, bewilder, bedevil. I can't think of either. There's literally scores of them in the English language, and each one of them means the intensification of what follows the be. In this case, belong. We would imagine that if you really belong somewhere, that's pretty much the end of your longing, because your longing comes from not belonging. The word tells you the exact opposite is true, that the capacity to belong derives from your willingness to be drawn up into a longing after life, even as you get to live it. Not a demand for more. So, there's an enormous uh, wealth of difference between desire and longing, right? And I think the older you get, intuitively, you begin to tune into this difference. And it needs a certain subtlety of life to present itself, or long in the tooth wouldn't help, it wouldn't hurt either. But the ability to belong is the willingness to sit still long enough to forsake all the other options but the one that's before you, and in so to become a kind of monogamist to a place. right? And be willing to take up the work of occupying a place, not the entitlement of doing so. These things are anathema to private property mavens the world over. But that's, to my mind, the essence of indigenosity is the capacity to have your personal identity be a consequence of the nature of a place and not the other way around. So you take your marching orders from the particulars of the place that uh, you submit to, which is what I've seen you do. Even though we haven't seen each other a lot over the last whatever how many years it's been, a decade, I guess, something like this. But I saw that your willingness to do so, and I mean, how many times did we laugh at the prospect, well, the fact of the tourists coming up the lane and asking you if the trip up to the falls was worth it.
Is it worth it? Is it worth it? I called it the ultimate white man question.
Oh God! And
That was that was going to be my new bumper sticker. Life, is it worth it?
Is it worth it? Right, right. And I mean, more often than not, when I was with you, you said, "Not really," which is a great answer because, from the point of view of where that question comes from, nothing would be worth it. They don't ask that of the parking lot. Is the parking lot worth it? But they should have started there. The parking lot, not worth it. How good can the falls be?
Yeah, I heard another word on the radio today, and I thought, oh, this would be a good word to ask Stephen about. He's such a wordsmith. And so I heard the word otherwise.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, okay, I want to hear what, did you have what does that mean, otherwise? There's that wise word in there, otherwise, otherwise it's like something different or,
Not only that, but it makes a distinction between matters of opinion and questions of wisdom. And in deep wisdom, there's the capacity to grant alternative and opposing kinds of wisdom that's not consistent with your own. It's something like being a civilized country. In a civilized country, the last thing you would ever be is threatened by the existence of another civilized country. You would actually be ennobled by the presence in the world of another civilized country, right? And so you wouldn't rise up in kind of aggression at the prospect of more than one civilized place in the world at a time. You'd be grateful for it, and you'd be relieved, frankly, that you didn't have the market cornered on civility, right? That's a kind of place I'm still looking for.
And what about this thing, wisdom? Where would you see that? What would you say that is? What is this thing, wisdom? Where does that come from? And how do you get it if you can get it or acquire it?
Yeah, you can't get it. If you could get it, you and I would both be out of business, right? Because it's just, quote, there for the taking. But the notion that you can get it is one of the things that defeats the possibility of drawing close to it. To my mind, wisdom is something like that woman. I'm speaking as a man now. That there's an old phrase that goes something like, "I chased her so long that she finally caught me." That's what wisdom is like to me. I mean, you can chase it, but you can't lay any claim of propriety, ownership, or even any particular integrity if wisdom decides to linger with you for a while. I mean, you can set yourself up for it. You can do all the work, but there's no assurance about the consequence of it. You could just be bitter at the end of that enterprise, or worse, or impoverished, or worse. And wisdom is, I mean, the Greeks understood wisdom to be fundamentally feminine. Sophia was their word. And philosophia is the love of that thing.
That's where Sufi actually comes from.
Is that right?
The Suf is Sophia.
Okay, it's the same word. Sure it is. I see it now. So, I called my little enterprise, I gave it a kind of umbrella name, Orphan Wisdom, I called it. And early on, this is, man, 15 or 20 years ago. And people have asked me about that frequently because they don't like the orphan part. They don't mind the wisdom part, but they're not wild about the orphan part. Can you get one without the other? They asked me. And I said, maybe you can, but I can't. Because I didn't start off in wisdom. I started off in orphanhood. Anybody who looks like me on this continent, by definition, occupies that position.
Maybe
Willingly.
maybe that's one of the starting places, right? That
Yeah.
was wisdom when you got to the orphan part.
Yeah. You know, orphanhood doesn't mean that you're as bereft as it sounds. Orphanhood doesn't mean you don't have parents. Doesn't mean you don't have a lineage. You don't have an ancestry, quote, worth having, unquote. It does mean, though, that there's been some kind of fundamental rupture, and the consequences of that rupture are still playing themselves out. And your unwillingness to begin with your own kind of poverties constitutes a prolongation unnecessarily of the orphanhood that could haunt you well into your middle age and beyond. And it seems to me, you know, speaking as the, it seems to me that white supremacy is fundamentally an uninitiated adolescent orphanhood that went on so friggin' long and was never really challenged. So they invent this notion of some kind of purity to compensate for the deep and dark suspicion that wreckage is their ancestry, and poor people not worth being from, that's their ancestry, and hence, and they're not the first people, of course, to invent the notion of a racial purity to compensate for a sense of inadequacy, but they're doing a wretched job of pretending that it's a lifestyle or a culture.
Or you add to that that we're a people that come from a story that says there's something wrong with us from the get-go, and we screwed up, and now we're getting punished for it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's true. That's the so-called Judeo-Christian orientation is a primordial trespass. You can't get behind that. That's as far back as anybody can go in thought, in deed, in conscience. And if you're unwilling to sign up for it, it's an enormous leap towards some kind of sanity. But if you look, like I said, if you look like me on this continent, you still have to cop to the thing that you're not at home. You're not at home. Your people overstayed their stay, and you're the consequence, period. You know, as you introduced me to the great line in your part of the world there, that the missionaries came to do good and
Stayed to do well.
and did very well by themselves.
To do well.
That's it. That's it. So until that comes to call, like my country, Canada, for example, remains impoverished and adolescent in its soul because of the unwillingness to learn and to know and to abide by its foundation, the conditions of its beginnings, which were a dislocation of the people we found here, period. It's not a matter of opinion. And it's deeply inconvenient, but there it is. And you're not going to have a country with a soul that's recognizable to itself until you come and deeply make good on the trespass that is your real foundation story on this continent.
So I'd like to see your map about that, because I've been cooking with that one for a while, because you see what's happening here, and it's finally getting more airplay. That basically we stole the country, we killed off all the native people and flora, and then we used slavery to build our economy. And like, what is the mapping between the honest recognition that in fact happened to true remorse, maybe to some kind of true repentance? Like, how do you map that out to where we get to reconciliation and remediation, or some kind of breakthrough to clear that shadow that will haunt us for the rest of this country's lifespan if we don't do that work. How would you map that out?
Well, I'm leery of the notion of in one fell swoop you've got a solution to this, and I don't pretend to have one, but we could wonder about it a little bit now. So here's the first thing. To my mind, the first act would be this. It didn't begin there. I mean, your characterization just a minute ago is a fair one, but it arbitrarily begins at we did this, right? And that's an arbitrary beginning. It is certainly the beginning from the indigenous person's point of view on this continent, but it's not the beginning for us, right? Because something propelled us across the ocean to come here. So there's at least that much more going on. And it turns out that the lion's share of people who look like me, who ended up in North America, began their cultural lives and their capacity to inflict this kind of mindless suffering on people we found here. We began that whole tutelage by being on the receiving end of mindless suffering, you see. That's what we were running from, basically. So it's not freedom we were seeking. It's something like closer to relief. And if you include that, it doesn't let you off the hook, or the meat hook, I guess you'd call it, of awareness of these things, but nor does it induce in you a sense of personal guilt for an ancestral trespass. This is the fundamental challenge that has to be brought, because I've never seen conscience derive from guilt. Conscience derived from a sense of responsibility. Yeah, when you remember that the word responsibility means the capacity to respond. And guilt is the absence of the capacity for responsibility. There's no doubt about it. It paralyzes you, and it backs you into the corner of copying this particular kind of identity, right? You have no obligation. Okay, a very quick story. So, as you know, I have a school. You were at it for a session, and one of the things I do is I got a friend just down the river here in the Algonquin Reserve, and I have him come the first session of the school and help and give people an understanding. I say to him, just tell them where they are, if you will. Find some way to tell them where they are, and you're much more qualified to do this than me. He's not wild about doing it, but he does it each time. The very first time he did it, he finished his sort of formal presentation, and then he said, if you have any questions, I'll answer a few. And the very first question went like this, Bodhi. The woman said, and she was a well-intended, much-traveled nurse who volunteered her work in various places in Africa and had really seen the world. This is why her particular response was a little, disappointing. She said to him, Merv, I'm so sorry. And he looked down and he wouldn't look up again. And I knew that we'd lost him basically right there, because she was doing two things, using him as a kind of noble, savage stand-in for every wronged person that this world has ever seen. And of course, she volunteered to be every wrong person that had ever been. There, we had the whole arrangement in this little room with us then. And then she said, what can I do? As if Merv, in his infinite indigenous Indian wisdom, would know what she's supposed to do. So there's a long pause and he won't look up, and I know he's not going to say a word, and this is going to go on forever. So after a moment or two, I leaned over and I said to him, shall I respond? And he just nodded. Yes, in the affirmative. And I said, okay. And I looked at her and I said, stop agreeing to be a white person. And all the white people in the room looked at me like, what could that possibly mean? He sounds like he knows what he's talking about, but it doesn't make any sense. Well, it does make sense when you begin to realize that there's no such thing as white people for an awful long time, right? White people, is a construct, and it's a consequence of difference. You find yourself in the presence of difference, you back away from the difference, and arbitrarily and artificially devise this other kind of identity called sameness, right? But I mean, you and I would allegedly be white people, but there's worlds of differences between where we come from culturally and aesthetically and in every other way, as there should be. And given 15 minutes, we would find more that separates us, not in a egregious way, simply establishes the differences between us than we would ever find that we look at each other and say, well, at least we're white. So that's good. I mean, honest to God, I've never said that out loud in my life till just now. Nor have I ever thought it.
Hey, well, at least we're white. It's got a nice sound to it.
It's a t-shirt.
At least we're white.
They can't take that away from us.
That's funny.
Yeah, they'll take the suburbs from us, but they can't take white from us. Not that anybody would want it, but still.
I tell people I really only think I'm white on the outside anyway.
Well, I don't even think I'm that, to be honest. I don't even know what it is. I mean, I got some Irish in the background, and they will look across the channel at the English and say, "Are you kidding?" There's nothing that binds us but enmity. They wouldn't find sameness between them, nor would they seek it, nor would they take any comfort in it. So stop agreeing to be a white person is not bad advice in a time like this. Mind you, it's a deep challenge, of course. I know it is. I'm not saying this ignorant of what's been on the streets in your country for the last, month or so, whatever long it's been now. But the deeper challenge to my mind is, if you agree to be a white person, then you agree to establish or organize yourself around trespass and extraordinary levels of grievance, right? But there's other organizing principles where our humanity can appear instead of being unnerved by it and finally abandon it in the name of some kind of super identity. So I don't think we have any obligation to be, quote, white people. There's no such thing. There's no culture called white. There's no ancestral homeland called Whiteville, or there's no ancestral language. There's no material culture that's, quote, white. I mean, this thing is a very recent thing, and really, we have no obligation to understand ourselves in these terms. That's all.
In general, I think a lot of white people in America are feeling the obligation to, because white privilege as a notion, as a belief system, is certainly being played very loud in this country, as you know.
Sure.
And how we respond to that, and of course we respond to it in very different ways, depending on if people start feeling guilty and shamed and etc. All the stuff you've spoken to. So what if I would see if I could come back to this thing about excuse me, because I'd love help with this, because this at least not necessarily a solution, but some kind of stepping stones towards how we come to a better place, in terms of, we've got to acknowledge, every one of us has to acknowledge what happened for us to be here now and what it took for this to happen. And then if we really look at it, the incredible remorse we ought to feel about what the people that came before us did and continue to do in many places. And where does there, how do we get from remorse? What would be the next step? Would it be repent, where you actually have to show your remorse in some manifestation? How do you see that progressing, some of those stepping stones?
Okay, it's a good question. If you think, and this is a bit of a grim parallel to draw, maybe, but let's try it. If you think about the legal system in your country and mine, they're similar. If you look at the structure of it, they clearly divide the function of prosecution from the function of judgment, from the function of the discernment of what the punishment should be. Why is that? Why is the victim never in a place of determining the judgment? Because the legal system understands that people who've been victimized have been in some fashion scarred by that victimization, and that scar renders them untrustworthy, typically, when it comes to determining what should be the outcome, what should be the recompense, and so on. So the problem with the formulation, as I hear it, that you've just made, is the notion, who are you going to repent to? That's the key business. You know, it's I'm not a Catholic myself, I don't think, but the Catholics have a beautiful function called the confessional. What they do with it is another thing, but as a function, it's genius. Why? Here's why. Because you have to say stuff, but you have to say it to somebody. You can't think it. It's not enough. And you can't quite just say it. You got to go a little further and hope for on your own behalf some kind of better day that you might be capable of, right? But you need the witness. Okay, so you know the priest's position there is fundamental to the arrangement, right? And I mean, we'll stop the comparison there, but the point I'm making about all this is to say that I'm not sure that being trespassed upon intergenerationally qualifies anyone to hear the confession of the one who's perpetrating the trespass. It's a real dilemma. And I'm not sure I have a better scheme. I probably don't. But I would say that maybe the principal obligation here is to find some way to distinguish a sense of responsibility from a sense of personal culpability. You're deeply responsible for the life that you live. That's true. But you're not totally in charge of the life that you live, no matter how much, quote, privilege you might have. I mean, the last time you checked all these privileged people, it didn't look like the privilege was working out for them so fabulously well. In other words, it's a kind of dark burden, this privilege, number one. And number two, when it comes to this question of privilege, let's distinguish from the word white for a moment and investigate the notion you're born to it almost exclusively, which you can claim no personal guilt for. So then it's very difficult to give your privilege away without conferring the darkness of privilege along with it. You see, so how unprivileged are you supposed to be before you break even without muddying the waters and darkening somebody else's life by conferring that privilege upon them or transferring it or something like this? So how about this? Could we acknowledge that a good number of us who look like me are born into circumstances that are likely to translate into a benefit that's readily available to them without question? Then how about earning the privilege you were born to retroactively, rather than trying to wash your hands and be a poor man's son when you're not, and you'll never be? Maybe the idea would be that you could earn the privilege. So if you think about circumstances in other parts of the world where people have good fortune come to them. Oh, I don't have to invent one. A good example. The last book I teach in the sequence at the Orphan Wisdom School is a chronicle from the 1640s that a Jesuit recorded when he lived virtually right here, about an hour away from where I'm talking to you. And of course, he was involved in discrediting the religion of the place and converting the natives and so on. But in it, he tells the following brief vignette. He said, a fire swept through the town, the village that I was staying with, the Huron village. And this is the second time this year that this happened. And in both times, the same guy and his corn stalks were spared. And what did he do both times? He gave virtually all his corn away because he had it to give away, right? And twice. So of course people are looking at him like he's obviously lived a gifted sort of life, and of course there's all manner of things that might have gathered around him, and the Jesuit says, well, he was wise to part with what he had, so as not to draw enmity and so on, which was a rather dark view of it. It probably was there, but this speaks to this notion of privilege. He was a beneficiary of a mystery, really, and the mystery passed him by, and the consequence of that was he included everyone to the extent that he could in the mystery that had been kind to him this time. So, are we talking about alms? Why not? Are we talking about community service? Why not? I'm not sure what form it takes. It's not for me to dictate it, but I would certainly say that it's not beyond the realm of the possible to earn the privilege that you were born to, rather than imagine it as a shame that you're obliged to carry and then secretly deal in at the same time.
That is so. That
If
is
there's fewer secrets and more overtness in contending with this question of privilege, the likelihood is that you get better at being a privileged person.
That is so right on, Stephen, and I subscribe to that exactly. I would have obviously I would have articulated it differently, but I am so on that page with you around privilege. So thank you so much. I love how you articulated it because it kind of helped me see it from a slightly different angle.
Mm-hmm.
Right on, beautiful. How are we doing for time? I heard maybe you had to get out of here soon.
Let me see. Yeah, we got about 6 or 7 minutes, if that's all right.
Yeah, sounds good. So since maybe you're kind of anxious in the stirrups to get on the road, and I could understand why you would be, and there's plenty of work to do out there, and you can't do it right now. How are you dealing with that?
Not very well, Bodhi, to be honest. Um, I, like so many people, I had everything disappear over the sequence of about 2.5 months, an entire year's work, plans, of course, the income and all of that, gone without a trace. I'm like a mouth with no teeth. It's all the possibilities are gone, and now, of course, it's looking like this could well turn into next year with easily. So I'm here at the farm, and yes, we live with a number of people who help us with the farm. Honestly, this social distancing thing and all of that has changed virtually nothing except my sense of what I'm capable of. And I don't think I've ever flirted with depression in my life that I've ever been aware of. But I must tell you that I've had all kinds of signs that I'm visiting that neighborhood in the last 4 or 5 weeks in particular. And I'm more forlorn than anything else, to be honest. And yeah, I certainly missed the road, which is surprised me. I didn't know how fond I'd grown of it. And but more than that, it's not an occupation for me, as you would understand it. It's a calling, and it came to me relatively late in life. I was very lucky to get it, and I'm just wondering if I'm not watching, the grains of sand of my allotment beginning to run through my fingers, and the tighter I try to squeeze them, the more they run. And have I already lived through the period of my life called when I could stand and deliver, not with impunity, but at least with great opportunity. And I was so lucky for so many years, and I don't want to talk about it in the past tense, to be honest, but it's very foreseeable that it's gone. And and that just freezes me, basically, and that possibility does. Yeah.
Wow, wow, that's big.
Mm.
Yeah, that's big.
Yeah. Yeah, we're releasing a new record from the tour we made last year, the Nights of Grief and Mystery tour that we were supposed to come to Maui this year, of course. And I'm so looking forward to that. Down to Australia, and we're going to 4 continents in 70 gigs, and the whole thing is vaporized. We have the record, and I'm trying to get excited. You know, we have to go into final editing in the next probably next week, and I know it's good, but it's it comes at a bad time for me, to be honest. It was We were going to release it in advance of the tour, and now it's instead of the tour, and it can't hold that, you know, and it's not fair for me to ask the record to be a stand-in for the life I don't get to live now. But it may well come to that in the between now and Christmas. How about you?
Wait. Well, I'll come back to me. But that made me think of something. A couple of DJs, well-known DJs, on their own individually got in touch with Ram Dass, and I've heard this. I've heard some of this stuff where a DJ is playing tracks, and every now and then you hear, 2 minutes or 3 minutes of Ram Dass talking about something, interweaving with this DJ stuff, and some of it is really good. And I could imagine that you could do something like that, or if you get where I'm pointing, I could totally see you doing something like that. This one is from East Forest, is I think the name of the group or the DJ. If you want to look it up, East Forest and Ram Dass, to get a sampling of what I'm actually pointing to as something I could see that might interest you.
Well,
Because your words are, it's like you could write a book and you can stand up in front of people, and this is another piece.
yeah, yeah. You know, I'm horrifically old-fashioned when it comes to the technology.
But get James to go online and show you something from East Forest and
Okay.
Ramdas, just to give you a sample of if it gave you an idea or something. But I hear you. As far as me, man, I don't know who's got it made better than I do. I go home. I've got my family, my 3 kids, my grown kids, and 3 of my little grandkids, and I'm spending more time in our garden. The garden is really beautiful right now. And then I'm called out. I too have a calling, and that seems to be getting more and more attention. And I have a great woman assistant partner now, phenomenal, phenomenal. And it really needed a woman sidekick in some of the situations. And now I'm actually starting to bring my dog here. So the death store has a death store dog, and which is way cool, way cool. It needed a dog, and so my life is so very full, and I'm doing some really cool stuff in that whole spectrum of taking care of dead bodies and helping families and helping dying people, and I'm teaching and online and in person, et cetera, et cetera. So very rich life, and then I get to go home, and my grandkids want me to come down and jump in the river and balance the whole thing out. And
Yeah.
thank goodness, maybe they're having the best summer of their lives. It may turn out to be the best summer of their lives. No school and total freedom in the jungle and the waterfalls and playtime and on and on and on. And it's fun to witness that. And fortunately, I get to live where it's really quiet, and I get to hear birds, and I get to hear a dark night sky. I see a dark night sky, and yeah, all that. So for me, um, I don't know who's got it better than we do.
Mm.
If they do, they're really fortunate. And of course, I feel incredibly fortunate. And actually, I'm right on that page of earning what has been given to me and continues to be given to me. That's my
Mm.
work. And all I want to do is keep giving back and doing what I can.
It.
I say be a lamp, be a lifeboat, and be a ladder, and then do what you can, and don't get and don't get too caught in the craziness, the insanity really of what's acting out right now.
Mm.
And I cry for my grandkids. I
Yeah.
do. I cry for everybody's grandkids.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear that. I mean, I don't know what else you can do if you're willing to be honest with yourself about, what it's come to. We're coming at the end of the time we're talking here, and we're obviously dipping our toes into a different kind of river that's not about this can be fixed and this can be changed and this can be challenged. And sometimes, I mean, the most reliable testimony is the one that doesn't try to see past this very moment. And I've both heard the phrase sudden death and perhaps even have used it from time to time, but in all honesty, there's no such thing as sudden death, right? I mean, death is a given, right? It's a given. It doesn't matter your opinion about it. It's a given. And in that sense, if it's now, you calling it sudden just means you weren't willing to know how present and how available to death you were. So it's in a confession of truancy when you call it sudden death. And when we come to the end of the interview and we're kind of, for a moment, melancholic about the near future and what the kids are inheriting from us, well, that shit's real, and it belongs. And I don't think we should try to wish it away or imagine that by virtue of clicking their heels 3 times and saying there's no place like home, that the kids are going to have a better time of it than we did. It doesn't look like it. And for that, we both stand in the kind of mourning, and I'm right along with you. If it wasn't for the kids, I might have said a long time ago, I'm not even sure I would have partied. I probably just would have stayed home. And now I'm staying home, I guess, for the moment, for the sake of the kids too. So it's a very strange arrangement. I hope I get to go out again. I hope I get to go out with the band, especially because that was magic, I have to tell you. And but God knows. And last time I checked, there's not a direct pipeline. So
I
we're just
thought
gonna
we
have
were
to
really
see.
going to get you back here. I really did, and maybe that'll still happen. Yeah, when you say
Maybe.
sudden death, I sometimes I say to people, if you really knew you're going to die and you didn't know when, if that was really real to you, why would it come as a surprise to you if you found out it was today? So that's where
Disappointed, sure.
yeah,
Heartbroken,
yeah,
sure.
yeah,
But shocked and betrayed? Come on.
yeah. Well, so grateful to have this opportunity to spend time with you, and please give Natalie a big hug for me. And Leila was super thrilled that you and I were going to have some time together, and I so appreciate who you are and have so much respect and love and gratitude for you. So
Thank you, man.
may you come out of whatever funk that's in your neighborhood and stick around and get out on the road soon, or in some way find your way to where it works well for you as it is. And
Thank you, Bodhi.
I hope your body's healthy. You look good, and I know you've been dealing and challenged with your health and your respiratory, and I hope you're faring well out there.
Thank you. I'm doing all right for now. I'm lucky that way. Awful good to see, and everybody on this end said make sure you say hi to him and more, Natalie in particular. So back to you, and let's maybe not wait 10 years to do this again.
I'd love I'll contact you again about this. I'd love that.
Deal.
Thank
See
you.
you, boss.
Thank you, Stephen.
Take care of yourself, man.